Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the case may be. My name is Madison Smith, and I will be speaking to you today about the descriptive epidemiology characteristics of pediatric endemic Burkitt lymphoma. Specifically, this is a malignancy that occurs in the pediatric population and is endemic to certain areas. We will discuss all of that in the upcoming slides. I wanted to start by discussing place. Where do we mostly see Burkitt lymphoma occurring? We know that for something to be endemic, it has to be occurring in specific areas or communities. For pediatric Burkitt lymphoma, there is a high prevalence of cases in Brazil, Papua New Guinea, and sub-Saharan Africa. You will see throughout this presentation that I have shortened sub-Saharan Africa to SSA. This begs the question, why? Why in these areas do we see Burkitt lymphoma? And I'll discuss that in this slide deck. There are certain biological risk factors that are specific to place, to physical environment for Burkitt lymphoma to occur. So the largest risk factors are infection with malaria and infection with Epstein-Barr virus. You'll see here the image at the top of your screen shows the global 2019 malaria age standardized rate distribution. You'll notice that the dark coral areas are the areas that are most frequently affected by malaria. What's interesting is that this corresponds directly with endemic Burkitt lymphoma. We see a pretty high prevalence of it in Brazil, but we see a very large prevalence of it in sub-Saharan Africa and Papua New Guinea. The image at the bottom of your screen shows the 2023 global prevalence of Epstein-Barr virus in patients with Burkitt lymphoma. So where the top of your screen is looking at global, regional, and national instance of malaria, the bottom image is looking at the prevalence of Epstein-Barr virus in patients who already have Burkitt lymphoma. So again, the darker red colors are areas where there are a higher prevalence of Epstein-Barr virus in patients with Burkitt lymphoma. We see that this is true in Brazil, and it is true in sub-Saharan Africa. However, it's very interesting to note here that for Papua New Guinea, the prevalence of Epstein-Barr virus in patients with Burkitt is unknown. The person characteristics of Burkitt lymphoma, as we talked about at the beginning of this slide deck, it's in the name. We're looking at pediatric Burkitt lymphoma cases. So we're looking at cases occurring in children younger than 18. The average age of diagnosis is 6 years old. And as far as gender goes, males are affected more than females. So you'll see in the image on your screen a line graph conducted from a study in Uganda measuring the age and gender of patients with Burkitt lymphoma from 1993 until 1997. So we see that the age really starts to drop off at about in between 15 and 20 years old. And the dark line indicates male gender, and the light gray line indicates female gender. So we see here that males are more affected than females. As far as socioeconomic class, it is worth noting that according to the World Bank Index, the countries where pediatric Burkitt lymphoma is endemic to are not high income countries. So the region of sub Saharan Africa mostly includes countries that are in the low to lower middle income. Papua New Guinea is a lower middle income country, and Brazil is an upper middle income country. This is interesting to note that we are seeing most cases of endemic Burkitt lymphoma occurring in children in low to middle income countries, no high income countries here. That's not to say it doesn't happen there, but it's more frequently happening in these areas. Biological characteristics. You can see here the sort of transformation of cells from Epstein virus infection by number 1 through malaria infection in number 4. And in number 5, you can see there that there is activation of an oncogene, which sort of helps the Burkitt lymphoma proliferate itself and grow and develop into a real neoplasm. This specific morphology and chromosomal translocation occurs in patients with Burkitt lymphoma who we either see Epstein virus infection, malarial infection, or immunosuppressive, immunosuppressive characteristics from HIV. This happens regardless of where patients are. If they're experiencing one of those 3 things, then we see this sort of cascade of events happening biologically. So why are we talking about plants if we're talking about social environment? This is most significant for the occurrence of endemic Burkitt lymphoma in the sub-Saharan Africa region. So there is a plant species there that has the ability to activate viral replication of Epstein virus infected cells. This is especially significant because in the sub-Saharan African region, this plant is used in many cultural activities, including religious ceremonies, wedding ceremonies, birth ceremonies, children's plays, and even in construction. Additionally, and probably most surprising, it's also used medicinally. So we see it used for sore throat, headache, diarrhea, and wound care in that region. So this plant is used for many social, medical, and cultural activities within the sub-Saharan African region. And we are seeing what? We're seeing an increase in Burkitt lymphoma in children in the sub-Saharan African region. Now let's talk about time. Some studies show seasonal variation of pediatric Burkitt lymphoma during especially rainy seasons. You being at the University of Alabama and me being in Memphis, Tennessee, we understand and are aware that rainy seasons, that's when mosquitoes breed. We see an increase in the mosquito population. In these areas, Brazil, sub Saharan Africa, and Papua New Guinea, if there's an increase in mosquitoes, there's an increase in malaria infections. I was also surprised to learn that mosquitoes are vectors for Epstein-Barr virus. So it makes sense that this would also increase the prevalence and, well, incidence and prevalence of patients in those areas who are diagnosed with Burkitt lymphoma. Increase in mosquitoes, increase in these infections that can cause that biological cascade and make them more likely to have Burkitt lymphoma. These are the references that I used for this information. And thank you very much for listening to my presentation.